So what I really want to talk about today is kind of a follow-up to the videos that I did leading up to the launch of the Switch and the unveiling of the Switch, and trying and also explain where I see the Switch going in the future. Leading up to the launch of the Switch, I did a lot of videos on the subject of thinking that Nintendo was going to come out with a high-powered console, and there was some reason to believe that they would do that because, as we know, Nintendo was going to come out with a system that had cutting-edge chips, which they ended up doing, and they also were had talked openly about how they were going to um, not be in a situation where the controller um, was taking up a major portion of the cost of the console. So I mean, I think that led a lot of people to believe that the NX, which is now known as the Switch, would be a more traditional console. As it turns out, they did go with cutting edge chips. To my knowledge, the architecture or the SoC in the Nintendo Switch, which was provided by NVIDIA, was likely the most high-end um, SoC available at the time of these decisions that would work in a mobile form factor that Nintendo was going for. AMD, of course, has some nice Ultrabook SoCs that have recently been leaked out, but those are not chips that would have been available when Nintendo was developing the Switch, and I don't really see it as being a big issue because Nintendo can come out with something really at any point in time, maybe a year or two down the road, they can come out with an updated Switch, or they can come out with different form factors. So that's really not a concern to me because this is a new Nintendo that is into um, having the latest technology. They the the but going forward, it seems very likely that Nintendo is going to be sticking um, with mobile chips because it simply is a better option overall for what Nintendo is planning on doing, or what I believe Nintendo is planning on doing. I see Nintendo coming out with different form factors in the future. They could come out with a something. They could come out with a tiny little console box that plugs directly into the TV that doesn't have the mobile device uh, with it. And they can come out with that, maybe bundle it with a Pro controller, and this is a way that they could tap into the very wide and large install base that they have for their current architecture, and come in at either a lower price point than the Switch, or they could use that to come up with a higher end device using more modern chips, and perhaps not having to worry about cramming this all technology into a smaller form factor that's going to be in a mobile device. So they could come out with something more high end, or they could come out with something cheaper, or both. I also see them coming out with a miniature version of the Switch that more fits into people's pockets. I don't expect it to be super tiny, but I'm thinking maybe the size of the Game Boy Advance, or maybe a little bit larger than that. But I think that it won't have detachable controllers, and in doing so, they'll be able to trim down the size, and it'll also have a smaller screen, and it'll be uh, much cheaper for Nintendo to make. I wouldn't be surprised if they came up with something like this at the end of next year at a price point of maybe $199. And I honestly think that they will have something like this out before uh, the next Pokemon game comes out, just because they have an opportunity to reach an even wider audience with that title and with their architecture. If they combine the launch of Pokemon with a pocketable device. So that's kind of where I see Nintendo going. I see Nintendo using mobile chips for the foreseeable future. See, the problem is that we're not there yet with the Switch, but when it comes to something like the Xbox One X, um, I don't see there being any monumental leaps in graphics um, uh, beyond the Xbox One X. Yes, there will be better performance out of having a new CPU, maybe in the PlayStation 5 um, and the next generation Xbox, if Microsoft is even interested in the console market at that point in time. But it's not going to be a monumental leap in visuals. Uh, I wouldn't be surprised if the PlayStation 5 was, roughly twice as powerful as the Xbox One X in terms of graphic, in terms of the GPU and the graphics element of the system, and with a much better CPU, which will allow for um, basically you take a game like Shadows of Mordor on the Xbox One X and you're able to run it solidly at 60 frames per second at 4K, because that game can run at 4K but with lower end textures. But I think the PlayStation 5 is maybe going to be taking their high end textures and making it 4K 60 frames per second, and that's about the difference that it will amount to, especially early on. I'm sure Sony exclusives will take it even further, but you're not looking at monumental leaps in power and in visual, or at least you're not looking at monumental leaps in visuals beyond that. Just because we're getting into the laws of diminishing returns, and double the power isn't really that much of a difference. Like, let's say it's double the graphics capabilities of the Xbox One X. People used to mock Nintendo and joke about going from the GameCube to the Wii was basically two GameCubes taped together. Well, that basically sounds about what the Xbox, or what the PlayStation 5 is going to be, is basically two Xbox One X's that tape together, which in the real world doesn't really does not amount to any sort of a generational leap. Furthermore, the industry seems to be moving into a direction where I think more and more gamers are becoming more interested in medium budget games and less interested in AAA experiences. A lot of the third-party games these days are, multiplayer experiences, which, they look great, but they don't look as good as like a single-player experience that you see from Sony's first-party studios. And I think there's just much more of an appetite and respect for an indie game or a medium budget game from a company like Square Enix. Like, I can't stress this enough. Square Enix hasn't really made an amazing Japanese RPG with a AAA budget, probably dating back to the PlayStation 2. Games like Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default, I think are being viewed as by gamers as being more desirable to play than Final Fantasy 13 or Final Fantasy 15 now, which is a slight improvement, but it's still, you're only looking at like an 8 out of 10 title, and it's still filled with all kinds of you know all kinds of blockbuster AAA cliches like having a scantily clad female character, targeting, the teenage boy market that is totally out of place in other, of these AAA game themes that you see. And it's not much different than the film market when you think about it. In the film market, the kind of movies that are really, really respected uh, come in at a lower budget than the blockbuster uh, movies that are targeting more of a juvenile or teenage market. And it's really, if you look at the Academy Awards, traditionally you're getting great movies like in the genres like the drama genre with better acting, deeper meaning, and deeper messaging. You're simply not getting that out of a blockbuster film, and the video game industry is heading in the exact same direction with their blockbusters. Um, what ends up happening in society when a technology reaches the level of diminishing returns is that society ends up gravitating towards a way of experiencing the content in a more convenient way. You saw that with the music industry. People have gravitated towards digital ownership of their music, uh, subscribing to Spotify or downloading music on iTunes, even though the quality isn't the same as what you would get on a CD. I mean, maybe by now the quality is good as a CD was 10 years ago, but um, the convenience factor when people when the returns are diminished seems to be what resonates with customers. You've seen this in the movie industry as well, where Blu-rays are more technically superior to this day, or 4K uh, discs that you can purchase are technically superior to the movies that you get on Netflix, but due to the convenience factor that something like Netflix provides, that's just where the mainstream market has gone. And now I think, with the projections that we're seeing from companies like Nomura for the Nintendo Switch, it really seems to me like the new wave in video games is going to be for convenience devices, or just more convenient ways to play your games. With the Switch, obviously the big selling feature is that you can play these games in console mode, or to quote Bethesda, you can also play Doom wherever the hell you want. And that seems to be resonating more with customers than these 4K consoles. The PS4 Pro is only, taking up 25% of the overall PS4 market, is being absolutely destroyed by the sales of the Nintendo Switch. I see, in a relative sense, I see the Xbox One X doing a little bit better, but um, that's because the Xbox One fan base has had their egos destroyed during the PS4 Xbox One battles, where some of their games were not performing as well, and I think they're quite eager to jump on board early. But I think after the initial Christmas launch and number of months, the Xbox One X is going to sell significantly poorer uh, than the Switch. Well, it's going to sell poorer than the Switch at any given period of time, but also sell more poorly than the Xbox One S. And that's a trend that I see continuing. I just don't see a situation where like a PS5 comes out and it immediately sells better on a weekly basis, even after the launch window um, of the original PlayStation 4. Um, I see really slow uh, transitions for consoles with higher power in the future. Um, and by the time the PlayStation 5 comes out, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was a Nintendo system using mobile processors that was at least in the ballpark with uh, PlayStation 4 Pro in terms of graphics. Maybe the actual graphical fidelity is slightly lower than the PlayStation 4 Pro, but I imagine the CPU will probably be more advanced. And yeah, so I'm very excited about where the Switch is going. It's selling extremely well, and probably the most exciting thing about it as a Nintendo fan is that third-party games are doing really, really well on the system. It's for developers who have committed to the system early, um, like Capcom, like Ubisoft, among others. It's more profitable, or at least as profitable already, than something well established like the Xbox One, which has resulted in several companies promising significant increases in their support for the system. Square Enix is going to be bringing big support to the system. Capcom is going to be bringing support to the system. Atlas is going to continue their aggressive support for the system. You've already got Tecmo Koei involved. You've got Bethesda bringing a number of their best titles to the console, and I just see this as something that continues. Of course, people will point to the reluctance from Electronic Arts. However, I think there's more to that story than is being told. They came out early on the Wii U and promised all kinds of support for the system. They ended up putting a few titles on the system and then completely abandoning it. And I'm sure those titles weren't overly profitable. However, I think there's more to that story. There was also reports of Electronic Arts having approached Nintendo to basically provide them with their online services. And I think when Nintendo ended up rebuking this, it pissed Electronic Arts off, and they've been reluctant to support Nintendo systems, even when everybody else, every sane third-party publisher out there is jumping on board because they're continually being pressured by investors to do so. Why? Well, because investors feel that these companies would be crazy not to. The system is doing really well and is providing profits for those third-party companies coming on board. I still think it's only a matter of time before Electronic Arts comes on board with the system because they're simply going to have to. Even Nintendo eventually caved and started making games on iOS and on Android, and something can only make business sense for so long before these companies just have to come on board. I don't really see Electronic Arts being the best match for the Switch because the point of it is to be able to play your games anywhere, and they have been abandoning the abandoning or disrespecting the single player market. A lot of their games are, geared and tailored towards online only. The like if you take a look at Electronic Arts' sports titles, yes, you can have some fun with them offline. However, they're not nearly as enjoyable an experience when you don't have a stable internet connection attached to them, which will be a factor for some people who are using their Switch in mobile mode, depending on where they're using it and what their internet connections are. They also shut down Visceral Studios recently, which was one of the few good single-player studios that they had, and it seems as though the it seems as though BioWare, which was known for making great RPGs, is in decline since Electronic Arts purchased them, accumulating in Mass Effect 3 being a bomb, uh, sales-wise and also critically not up to par with the previous Mass Effect titles. I still think there will be a market for Electronic Arts on the Switch. By the end of next fiscal year, analysts are projecting 40 million Switch units out there, and it's not something that they're going to be able to deny. So I think you will see their major sports titles, at the very least, coming to the system. It would be nice to be able to play Madden, uh, you know, in portable mode, as well as on a console. So they're going to cave eventually because they're not really going to be given much of a choice, and their investors are going to start threatening to move their money into other companies, especially when they had lukewarm sales in this last quarter to begin with. So I see that as being more of a short-term uh, issue for the Switch. And yeah, like I personally, I'm enjoying the Switch. There's definitely some issues with it, some issues with the way online works right now on the app. I think there's a lot more that they can do with it. Then we'll have to wait and see what happens with the app once their paid online service is unveiled. But I would fully want to see uh, that the app is active whether your console is turned on or not, or whether you're near your console or not. I should be able to send messages at all times to my Switch friends from the app, and there should also um, there there should also be an ability to back up your save files via the cloud. And I think that Nintendo will add this ability eventually. Right now, Nintendo, I think, is reluctant to do it, or it's just simply not a focal point for them because they don't have a profit motive for it. And I'm not sure that a $20 a year online service is going to be a profit motive enough, because I think they'll sell that service just based on the cost being so cheap and the virtual console titles that you're going to get with that service. But I think before Nintendo starts coming out with different form factors is probably when you're going to see them enable cloud save backups, because if they can allow for cloud saves, me as a consumer becomes much more likely to buy multiple form factors, because it would be nice to be able to, buy that that more portable device for certain situations where I can just throw it in my pocket, and I'm going to want to continue playing the same games that I played at home on the portable device without having to mess around with too much in terms of saves. It should just all be automatic. I guess some of the other gripes that people have is the lack of the D-pad on the left Joy-Con, and perhaps a uncomfortable positioning uh, for the right analog stick on the right Joy-Con. And both of these decisions by Nintendo actually make sense, because you have to because they came out with a concept where you could remove the Joy-Cons and use them as individual controllers. So you needed with the left Joy-Con, when you turn it sideways, you needed the D-pad really to be buttons in that case. And of course, a much more comfortable position for the analog stick on the right Joy-Con would have been above the buttons. Um, However, that would have messed up the right Joy-Con as an individual controller as well, because the buttons would be on the left and the analog stick would be on the right. However, I think it's only a matter of time before you see third-party companies coming out with something like a Joy-Con Pro to deal with these issues, make Joy-Cons that are much more comfortable and designed 100% for the concept of using them with the system on the go. And I think they will alleviate these issues. You know, a lot of people are saying, well, they should have put the right analog stick more to the inside, like you see on, you know, the Pro controller, like you see on the PlayStation 4 controller. However, that doesn't work on a mobile device because the screen is in the way, right? So you saw the same issue on the PlayStation Vita and even the Wii U gamepad, but the Wii U gamepad wasn't an issue because they put the stick above the buttons, but you can't really put the stick on a more inside and low position on a portable device because the screen's in the way unless you're going to add a ton of width to the right Joy-Con. Anyways, that is all I have to say today, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on this and providing more videos in the future. Goodbye.